Every appearance is carefully observed. Every smile is analyzed. But what if, behind the grand ceremonies and polished speeches, a difficult choice forced Spain's future queen to put duty above family? What if one decision left even King Felipe wondering whether the crown had already begun changing his daughter? Today's story imagines that possibility. It is a story of loyalty, sacrifice, and the painful cost of choosing responsibility over personal feelings. It all began on the eve of one of the most important state ceremonies of the year. The royal palace buzzed with activity. Officials hurried through marble corridors. Military aides rehearsed protocols. Staff members checked every detail one final time. Everything appeared perfectly organized, until an unexpected problem threatened to disrupt the entire event. A confidential briefing revealed that last-minute changes were necessary after a diplomatic misunderstanding involving foreign guests. The ceremony itself could continue, but several planned appearances had to be adjusted. Schedules were rewritten, speeches shortened, public expectations suddenly shifted. Inside the king's private office, advisors debated every possible solution. King Felipe listened carefully. He understood that every decision carried symbolic weight. One wrong move could overshadow weeks of careful planning. When Princess Leonor entered the room, the discussion immediately stopped. The king welcomed her warmly. "There has been a complication," he explained. "We're deciding the best way forward." Leonor quietly reviewed the revised schedule. She studied every page without interruption. Several minutes passed before she finally spoke. "I think we should change the order completely." The room fell silent. Senior advisors exchanged uncertain glances. It was a bold suggestion. One advisor carefully objected. "Your Royal Highness, changing the order could disappoint many people who have traveled here." Another added, "It also changes the king's role during the ceremony." Leonor nodded. "I know, but it places greater attention on the guests we are welcoming. Our personal preferences shouldn't become the story." King Felipe looked at her thoughtfully. He admired her reasoning, yet he hesitated. For years, certain traditions had remained unchanged. Breaking them could invite unnecessary speculation. "I understand your point," the king replied. "But tradition also provides stability." Leonor answered respectfully. "So does adapting when circumstances require it." The conversation grew increasingly difficult. Neither raised their voice. Neither became angry. But both believed they were protecting the institution they loved. One emphasized continuity. The other emphasized flexibility. Neither argument was unreasonable. After nearly an hour of discussion, the king made his decision. "We'll keep the original structure." Most advisors quietly agreed. The meeting ended. Leonor politely thanked everyone and left the room. But later that evening, something unexpected happened. While reviewing updated security logistics with palace staff, Leonor noticed new information. The revised guest arrangements created practical difficulties for elderly visitors and international delegates with limited mobility. It wasn't simply ceremonial anymore. The original plan now carried unnecessary complications. She requested another meeting. This time, only she and her father were present. She presented the updated reports. "The situation has changed." King Felipe carefully examined every document. The evidence was convincing. Still, changing the program only hours before the event would create enormous pressure. "It can still work," he said. Leonor gently shook her head. "Yes, but not as well." The king sighed. "I worry people will think we're uncertain." Leonor answered quietly. "I worry they'll think we cared more about appearances than people." Those words lingered in the room. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, King Felipe leaned back in his chair. "When did you become so stubborn?" Leonor smiled softly. "I learned from my father." The tension eased, but the decision remained. Later that night, palace officials informed both the king and the princess that protocol experts also recommended Leonor's revised plan. It would better accommodate the visiting delegations while preserving the dignity of the occasion. The final decision still belonged to the king. Everyone waited. Just before midnight, he called Leonor back into his office. He held 2 copies of the ceremony schedule, the original, and the revised version. Without saying a word, he handed her the revised document. Leonor looked at him. "Are you sure?" He nodded slowly. "Sometimes duty asks us to let go of our own preferences." The next morning, the ceremony unfolded with remarkable precision. Guests appreciated the thoughtful adjustments. The revised order allowed smoother transitions. Several foreign representatives privately thanked palace staff for the consideration shown to their delegations. News coverage praised the event's elegance. Few people realized how close it had come to unfolding very differently. Inside the palace, however, whispers spread. Some advisors believed Leonor had challenged her father's authority. Others argued she had demonstrated the practical judgment expected of a future queen. Commentators imagined disagreements where none had been publicly visible. Speculation grew. Headlines suggested tension. Rumors described a growing divide between father and daughter. Neither responded. Neither offered interviews. Neither criticized the other. Instead, they continued working side by side. Several days later, during a quiet walk through the palace gardens, King Felipe finally addressed the situation. "You know what people are saying." Leonor nodded. "They think we argued." "We did," the king replied with a gentle smile. "But they misunderstand why." Leonor looked at him curiously. "You weren't trying to defeat me. You were trying to protect the institution." She answered. "And so were you." The king stopped walking. That's the burden of leadership. Sometimes two people can love the same duty and still disagree about the best path. Leonor reflected on those words. "I was worried I'd disappointed you." King Felipe shook his head. "No, you challenged me. There's a difference," he continued. "If no one around a monarch is willing to ask difficult questions, the institution becomes weaker." Leonor smiled. "I wasn't asking to win." "I know. You were asking because you cared." The king placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "And that makes me proud." Months later, palace staff would quietly remember the fictional disagreement as an important turning point. Not because it revealed conflict, but because it demonstrated mutual respect. Leonor had placed institutional duty above the possibility of pleasing her father. King Felipe had ultimately placed the needs of the occasion above his own preference. Neither truly lost. Both chose service. And perhaps that was the real lesson. Leadership is not about always agreeing. It is about listening, questioning, adapting, and understanding that the strongest families are not those who never disagree, but those who continue respecting one another through every disagreement. The so-called bitter royal feud was never truly about anger. It was about responsibility, about two generations seeing the same challenge through different experiences. One shaped by decades of service, the other preparing for decades still to come. In this fictional story, Princess Leonor chose duty over her father's feelings, not because she loved him less, but because she believed that true duty sometimes requires difficult conversations. And King Felipe, despite his initial hesitation, recognized something every parent eventually must accept. The child they once guided is becoming a leader capable of making difficult decisions independently. Perhaps that realization was more emotional than any disagreement itself. Because every future queen must eventually step out of her father's shadow. Not by rejecting his wisdom, but by building upon it. Thank you for watching this fictional story inspired by public figures. If you enjoyed this imagined royal drama, be sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, thank you for